This section we're going to have a look at the lens. The first thing to think about is the focal length of your lens. This determines its angle of view, so how wide the shot can be and how much is in focus. A lot of cameras come with what's called a zoom lens, which means it will change from one focal length to another. If you wish to have a higher quality lens, it's called a prime lens, then it has a set focal distance. This one is 50mm, this one is 85mm, and they have different purposes that I'm going to talk about now. A wider angle lens, which would be a millimetre of about 24mm, gives you a nice wide angle shot. So it's quite good when you're shooting in a cramped space or you want a really wide landscape. But you do get distortion on the edges of the image where the perspective is thrown. This lens here is an 85mm lens or telephoto lens. 85 to 135mm is really good for portraiture because it means you can photograph a person without being right on top of them. You can be a little bit back but be nice and tightly cropped into their face. A 50mm lens is close to what the human eye can see, so it is a very popular starting lens. It also reduces distortion in the image. Whenever you're using a zoom lens at its extremes, this one goes from 18mm through to 135, you're going to get more distortion on those extremes. This lens is trying to do everything at once. The next thing you need to think about with your lens, you've got it on 50mm, is your focus. It's important to always focus the lens, and there's a couple of different methods you can use. So on this digital SLR, on the side of the body, you can change from autofocus to manual focus. Autofocus, you can use this, but it will always look for the most contrasty thing in the scene when it's focusing. Next, we're going to have a look at aperture. Aperture is a creative control of the camera which determines the depth of field in your shot. That means how much is in focus. It also works like the iris of our eye, where you can change the size of the aperture to determine how much light is let into the camera. Here we have the aperture numbers on the side of this lens. The aperture is also called an f-stop on aperture 8 because it's a good number to choose when you haven't got heaps of light but you want a decent depth of field or everything in focus. If I turn this lens around, you can see that aperture hole. As the numbers get higher, this one goes up to 22, the aperture will get smaller and the depth of field will be increased. Everything will be in focus. If I turn the aperture the opposite direction, the hole gets wider and lets a lot more light in. But it creates a shallow depth of field where your subject will be in focus, but the background and the foreground will be out of focus. You can actually tell how good a lens is by its aperture range. The lower the number, this one goes to 2.8, usually the better the lens. The more size that you have in terms of megapixels on your camera, the larger you can print your image. But if ultimately you only want to go to a screen presentation, then those megapixels won't be so important. Use what you have available as long as it has manual controls. So even your iPhone can be used. You can download applications for the iPhone and allow you to set the camera's creative controls. Quite often lenses come with a hood, this item here, which also reduces light coming directly from the side into the camera, which causes glare. The SD card is a storage device for storing your images. This can be taken out of the camera and put into a computer or a card reader to transfer your files. The raw file format, which is quite large, and therefore you need quite a bit of storage to handle that. At least 8 gigabytes is recommended.